On the afternoon of February 10th, 2006, Santama, a resident of Angchal in Kerala's Kollam district, was returning home from the local panchayat office. She had just collected important documents related to her twin granddaughters. Paperwork that held a future she had begun to plan with hope and determination. The sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the village lanes as she approached her modest home. The air was heavy with the quiet calm that often settles before dusk, a fragile peace soon to be shattered. But as she opened the door, the sight that greeted her changed her life forever. Inside, she found the lifeless bodies of her daughter Ranjani and her two infant granddaughters. The brutality of the scene was beyond comprehension. All three had been murdered, throats slit in cold blood. The room was drenched in silence, the kind that screams louder than any noise. No mother or grandmother should ever have to witness such a horrifying spectacle. The image was seared into her memory, a nightmare carved into daylight, and no one could understand. Why would anyone commit such barbarity against a young woman and two innocent infants? This is the true story of how a deeply personal tragedy eventually became a landmark criminal case. One that would mark the first time in India that artificial intelligence played a crucial role in solving a murder mystery. Ranjani was just 21 years old. She was a cheerful, optimistic, and caring young woman, deeply loved by her mother Santama and respected by neighbors. Her laughter often filled the small home they shared, and her kindness left a mark on everyone who met her. Like many girls her age, she had dreams of building a happy life, one filled with love, stability, and purpose. Living in the modest town of Angchal, Ranjani's world was mostly centered around her family, simple routines, and a few close friends with whom she shared her hopes and worries. Her days were marked by the comforting rhythm of community life. She often helped her mother with household chores, attended local festivals, and took part in neighborhood gatherings. Despite the modest means of her family, Ranjani carried herself with a quiet dignity and an infectious warmth that made her a beloved figure in Angchal. She dreamed of someday pursuing further education or finding a stable job to improve her family's future, but her immediate focus remained on nurturing close relationships and building a life of meaning. Among her neighbors was a man named Daival Kumar, a soldier in the Indian Army. As is often the case in small towns, familiarity gradually turned into friendship, and that friendship soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Daival was charming, disciplined, and confident, traits that naturally drew Ranjani toward him. To her, he represented not just love, but security and a shared future. Their relationship grew increasingly intimate over time. Though they never married, they became physically involved. Ranjani, believing in the strength of their bond, fully committed herself emotionally to Daival, trusting that their relationship would eventually lead to a lasting commitment. She often confided in her mother about Daival, speaking of his bravery in the army and his dreams for a peaceful future. For Ranjani, this was not just a fleeting romance. It was the beginning of a new chapter she hoped would bring happiness and fulfillment. The trust she placed in him was deep, and in her heart, she believed that their love would overcome any obstacles. Little did she know that this trust would soon be tested in unimaginable ways. Things seemed to be going well until Ranjani found out she was pregnant. For her, the pregnancy was not a crisis, but a moment of joy, a miracle that brought deeper meaning to her life. She imagined it as the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would embrace motherhood with grace and strength. But when she broke the news to Daival, his reaction stunned her. He was furious. Rather than expressing concern or support, Daival bluntly insisted that she get an abortion. He was adamant. He did not want the child and flatly refused to take responsibility. Ranjani, heartbroken and betrayed by the man she loved, refused to comply. She told him clearly, this child was his too, and he could not simply walk away from their shared responsibility. But Daival did exactly that. He returned to his army base in Pathankot, Punjab, cutting off all contact with Ranjani, leaving her alone to face the consequences. Left alone, Ranjani made a bold and defiant decision. She would keep the child, no matter what society said. In a conservative Indian society where single motherhood is often met with harsh judgment and isolation, Ranjani chose courage over convenience. She stood tall against the shame others tried to impose on her, determined to give her child the love and dignity it deserved. Ranjani, devastated yet determined, refused to let betrayal dictate the course of her and her unborn child's life. She approached the Kerala State Women's Commission, a statutory body established to safeguard the rights of women and advocate for their welfare. With courage fueled by desperation and love, she filed a formal complaint against Deval. The commission responded with empathy and urgency. Legal notices were issued to Deval, demanding his cooperation in a DNA test to establish paternity. Ranjani wasn't interested in revenge. She sought justice. She wanted recognition for her child, protection under the law, and a future free from abandonment and shame. With legal proceedings underway, Ranjani and her mother Santama traveled to Thiruvananthapuram for her delivery. It was a difficult time, but they hoped things would get better. While admitted to the hospital, they encountered a man who introduced himself as Anil. He claimed to be a resident of Kollam and appeared considerate and helpful. He even donated blood during the delivery, further deepening their trust in him. But Anil was not who he claimed to be. His real identity was Rajesh, a close friend and ally of Deval. Unknown to Ranjani, Deval had orchestrated his presence to infiltrate her life and gather information. Rajesh's mission was not to help, but to observe and, when the time came, eliminate the problem. He embedded himself in their daily lives, presenting himself as a well-wisher who understood their plight. After the birth of Ranjani's twin daughters, two innocent baby girls, Rajesh continued his manipulation. He told them that moving to a new house he had arranged would protect them from gossip and judgment, and allow them to raise the children in peace. Grateful and unaware of the deception, Ranjani and Santama agreed. But they were stepping directly into a carefully planned trap. On the morning of February 10th, 2006, Rajesh appeared calm and composed. He told Santama that certain documents related to government welfare for the twins needed to be collected urgently from the local panchayat office. Trusting him, and with no reason to suspect foul play, she left the house as instructed, thinking only of ensuring a better future for her granddaughters. It was a carefully calculated move. Rajesh needed to get her out of the way. The moment she was gone, Rajesh contacted Deval, who had discreetly arrived in town and was waiting nearby. Rajesh unlocked the door and let him in. What followed inside the house was an act of unspeakable horror. Ranjani, likely caught off guard and unsuspecting of such betrayal, stood no chance. The two men, driven by fear and a ruthless desire to silence her forever, carried out the killings with chilling precision. Ranjani's throat was slit, followed by the murder of her twin daughters. Tiny, defenseless lives extinguished without mercy. It was a scene of pure evil. When Santama returned home minutes later, she found the door ajar. What she saw inside would haunt her forever. The floor was soaked in blood. The silence, broken only by her screams, echoed through the neighborhood. Her daughter, her only child, was dead. Her granddaughters, barely a month old, lay motionless. But even in her grief, she knew she had to act. Amid her heartbreak, Santama resolved that the people who had destroyed her family would not get away with it. With trembling hands and a shattered heart, she contacted the police, beginning a long and courageous pursuit of justice. She went straight to the police and filed a first information report, FIR, her voice trembling but resolute. Despite her emotional trauma, Santama provided every detail she could recall, determined to ensure that justice would not be denied. The case was swiftly handed over to the Kollam police, who began combing through the crime scene for evidence. Just a few meters away from the house, they discovered a parked vehicle, a crucial piece of the puzzle. The vehicle was registered to Rajesh. This was the first major lead in the investigation. Police traced Rajesh's whereabouts and soon uncovered his real identity and background. It was then that his connection to Deval surfaced, triggering suspicion of a conspiracy. Yet the path ahead was tangled. Rajesh had operated under a false name, making it harder to track his movements. Meanwhile, Deval was stationed hundreds of kilometers away at an army base in Pathankot, complicating jurisdiction and coordination. Despite the breakthrough, the case stalled. All the police had were a couple of photographs found at the army base showing Rajesh and Deval together during their training days. There was no concrete proof linking them to the murders. And before authorities could act, both men disappeared without a trace. The case went cold. Days turned into months, and the months into years. Eventually, the triple murder case was marked as unsolved and filed away in the cold case archive. 20 years later, in 2026, the police department began reopening unresolved cases using newly acquired AI-driven facial recognition and photo aging technology. One such case that caught an officer's eye was the haunting triple murder of Rajani, her 17-day-old twin infants, and the involvement of mysterious men named Rajesh and Deval. The old photos of Rajesh and Deval were digitally aged by AI experts to project what they might look like in the present day. The enhanced images were then uploaded into an advanced reverse image search engine. Then a match was found. A recent wedding photograph from a social media account showed a middle-aged man in the background who bore a striking resemblance to the aged AI image of Rajesh. Authorities immediately launched surveillance. They discovered that the man, now going by the name Anil, lived a quiet life. But behind that simple facade was a man who had vanished 2 decades ago, Rajesh. He was quietly arrested. During interrogation, Rajesh broke down. He confessed everything. How in 2006, he was sent by his best friend Deval, an army man, to spy on Deval's ex-lover, Rajani. Rajani had been pregnant at the time, and Deval, unwilling to accept responsibility or the scandal of being the father, had wanted to confirm whether the twins were really his. Rajesh moved into the same neighborhood under a false identity. For weeks, he kept an eye on Rajani and her mother, reporting everything back to Deval. But what Deval wanted wasn't information. He wanted silence. Once Rajesh confirmed that Rajani had given birth to twins, he contacted Deval. The decision was made. On that fateful day, Rajesh convinced Rajani's mother to visit the nearby Panchayat office to collect some documents, lying that her presence was needed to receive aid. Once the house was empty, except for Rajani and her newborn twins, Rajesh called Deval, who was already on the move. Within hours, Deval arrived in town, wearing civilian clothes. The two men entered the house together. Rajani was feeding one of the babies when they struck. First, they gagged and pinned her down. She begged them to spare her children, but Deval was cold, unshaken. He considered the twins a stain on his career and reputation. Rajesh held her down while Deval slit the throat of Rajani. Then, without hesitation, they murdered both infants, just 17 days old. They cleaned up quickly and vanished. With Rajesh in custody, the trail now led to Deval. Authorities discovered that Deval had left the army shortly after the murders and changed his identity. He was arrested in a quiet operation. When confronted with Rajesh's confession, Deval initially denied knowing him. But when shown old army photos and Rajesh's detailed statement, including specific details only Deval could know, his resistance crumbled. He eventually admitted to orchestrating the murder, insisting it was to protect his career and because he believed Rajani was trying to trap him with the children. The case, reopened after 2 decades, now had full closure. Both men were charged with 3 counts of murder, conspiracy, and destruction of evidence. The courtroom was filled with journalists, human rights advocates, and relatives of Rajani, still mourning after all these years. The final verdict brought some sense of justice. Life imprisonment for both. Justice had taken 20 years, but it finally came thanks to technology, persistence, and the truth that refused to stay buried.